I feel like I should maybe put a disclaimer on this episode of the OHL podcast, because with Craig Hartsburg as the guest, this might just turn into a love letter to Sault Ste. Marie. Fair, unfair, Hartsy?
It's fair.
So how does a Stratford, Ontario boy end up being such a big fan of the northern city of Sault Ste. Marie?
Well, it's an interesting story. I was 15. I was playing in Guelph, Tier 2 for the Guelph Biltmores, and just playing hockey. And I obviously wanted to be a hockey player at that point. And when the OHL draft came about, Kitchener had the first pick, London had the second pick, and Sault Ste. Marie had the third pick. And so I remember my dad talking to me that you're probably going to go in the top 2 or 3 picks. And I'm 15 years old. You're just kind of like, wow, 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 wow. So Kitchener, London, obviously pretty close to Stratford, and we were pretty excited about playing there. And so the draft day came, and I was still living in Guelph because I went there to play Tier 2, and got home from school, and then the phone rang, and was Angelo Bombaco. And he said, we just selected you as the third pick to Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. And I'm thinking, okay, where is Sault Ste. Marie? So anyways, I called my mom and dad, and we were trying to figure out what our next step was. And so Angelo, Jim McCauley, who was part owner, and John Reynolds, who was the PR guy, called me and said, we're going to come pick you up and take you back to Stratford, and we want to meet your parents. And I said, okay. So they picked me up in Guelph. We drove to Stratford, and my mom wouldn't let them in the house because she was like, you're not going to Sault Ste. Marie. And so anyways, I went in the house, and my mom and dad were talking, blah, blah. So we ended up letting them in the house, and they came in and they sold us we'll fly you up, and we'll let you see the Sioux. We'll let you see what Sault Ste. Marie is all about. And so we went up there, and a good friend of ours, of the family, Rick Comley, was the coach at Lake Superior State at that point. And so he came over and met with us, and he was the Sioux Greyhounds' biggest salesman, to tell you the truth. He sold us on the Sioux. Anyways, we looked around, we saw the city, and it was like, okay, I'm going to go. And then I went, and to be honest, I've never left. My wife, I met my wife in high school, and my daughter lives there with our 2 grandsons who play minor hockey in the Sioux. So the Sioux is the greatest place. Anybody that in Southern Ontario that gets drafted by the Sioux, it is one of the greatest places to play junior hockey.
Is it true, Craig, that one of your first jobs was taking care of the grass and the around the billboards and painting sides of them up there in the Sioux too?
Yes. I went home after my first year in the Sioux. I was 16. I went home. That after my second year, I decided I wanted to stay in the Sioux as a 17-year-old. And my billet, Don Mitchell, he owned an advertising company, had all the billboards in town, and that was my summer job. I cut grass around the billboards. I painted the side of the billboards, and again, I end up spending the summer there because I met a kind of a special girl, and and so it was pretty neat. The Sioux in the summer is probably the most beautiful place in Ontario, and in the winter it can be a little bit snowy, and you've probably experienced that.
I sure have.
But anyways, it's turned out to be just a great experience in my life as a hockey player, for sure.
Was it those Sioux summers, Craig, that fostered your love of fishing?
Oh, for sure. My billet family, Don Mitchell, was a big fisherman, and I love fishing. In Stratford, my parents owned a cottage on Lake Huron, and we used to go fish perch on the shore and stuff. But when I got a chance to move to the Sioux, Don took me pickerel fishing and trout fishing, and so it was pretty neat place. If you're an outdoors guy and you like fishing, the Northern Ontario, the Sioux is a great place.
You know, being from Southern Ontario myself, cottaging on Lake Huron, very common. What a difference, though, cottaging on Lake Huron or being up on the shores of Lake Superior like you are in the Sioux.
Oh, it's totally different, and we still have I'm in Florida right now, and we'll go back early May. We have a place on the shipping channel now, just actually east of the Sioux, and we get to watch all the big ships go through. But fishing up there is outdoors is pretty neat place. And pickerel fishing, we love walleye. We call them walleye in the States, pickerel in Canada. But it's my grandkids. I take them now. We go on a fishing trip every summer. We fly in fishing, and it's a great place. And again, any kid that gets drafted to the Sioux, trust me, you'll love it. Your parents will love it. There's great people up there, and it'll be a great experience in your life.
You mentioned Angelo Bumbaco's name, whose name is synonymous with the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. How much of an influence did he have on you as a young man, Craig?
Oh, he was an amazing person. He cared about us as kids. He was our general manager, but he cared about his kids. I remember he owned him and his brother Joe owned a sports store. Was probably the only hockey store in the Sioux at that point. But as a young kid, after school, I used to go over there before practice and just look at sticks and kind of wander around. And he'd say, "Artsy, go down the basement and pick out 2 sticks." So I'd go down and pick out a couple sticks. And I remember the first time I was picked by the Finn Cups to go overseas with the Finn Cups to play in the World Junior Tournament. And he took me out. He said, "Artsy," he said, "go down to this clothing store, pick out a suit." And I know the Greyhounds didn't pay for it. Angelo paid for it. He just he cared about us as kids. He wanted the best for us, and he wanted us to represent Sault Ste. Marie and the Sioux Greyhounds the best we could. So he wanted to make sure that I was well dressed. I went to the World Championship representing the Sioux, and he was an amazing man. And anybody that played when Angelo was there, it was you have special memories of Angelo.
I guess it goes without saying that the recent announcement that Saginaw had been awarded the Memorial Cup over Sault Ste. Marie as one of the other contenders is a little bit disappointing to a guy like you.
It is, and I'm actually on the board of the Greyhounds, and I know we had lots of discussions before it, and we were certainly actually I think it was 2 years ago because of COVID, or that we thought we were going to be the front runner, and I know we applied and it didn't happen, but this one we had some stiff competition, and Saginaw will be a great place for it. They're a great organization. They've done a great job. But again, we thought the Sioux, it would have been a perfect place for the Memorial Cup in Canada. It's a small town that loves hockey and has hosted it before and done a great job in a really small rink. And now the building in the Sioux is more equipped to hold a Memorial Cup. So yeah, it was disappointing, but it is what it is. Life moves on, and we wish Saginaw nothing but the best.
Your last year playing up there in the Sioux, Craig, some scrawny little kid from Brantford shows up wearing a flashy number on his jersey, no less. What were your first impressions of this kid called Gretzky?
Well, actually, he didn't have a.
He had 9 there, didn't he?
No, he started with number 14.
14.
Because 9 was taken, and Muzz McPherson, who was quite a promoter of everything himself, included, but his players, and he talked Wayne into wearing 99. Number 9 was taken by Brian Galazzi, and he was a Sioux native that was a good player. But when Wayne showed up at training camp, it was like, and I'm sure we were all the same when we showed up at camp. We're scrawny little 16-year-olds, and everybody's talked about this phenom. And I had actually seen him a lot living in Stratford because Brantford would play Stratford. So I knew he was a pretty special player, but training camp started and it was like, okay, this little scrawny little guy. It took us about maybe 2 days of camp to realize that this guy's pretty special. And he made passes and plays that were like, that's not normal. And the start of the season, I ended up getting hurt actually during training camp and missed the first part of the year. But watching, it was like amazing what he was doing, and he went on to have probably I'm sure it's the greatest first year stats any player to ever play in the Ontario Hockey League.
Of course, from being his teammate in junior, you had to play against him for a long time in the pros. Did he give you fits? Did you sleep well nights before you knew you had to play in the Edmonton Oilers?
Well, you know what? It wasn't a physical fear that you would have of playing Wayne. It was just the mental part, because he was so far ahead of everybody. He thought the game 2 steps ahead of everybody. So again, if you're trying to defend him, it wasn't like you worried so much about him beating you. It's just like, okay, where is he going to pass the puck? And that's what I think everybody, realized as it went on. It wasn't like trying to stop Wayne one-on-one. Most players in the world can get stopped one-on-one. It's just where he was going to find an open person. And he thought 2 steps ahead of anybody that was on the ice.
How much fun was it for you to be a teammate of his again at that 87 Canada Cup?
Oh, well, and I was at the 81 Canada Cup as well with them. But the 87, him and Lemieux, they kind of pushed themselves, each other it was almost like they challenged each other to see how good they could be. And the Russians were an amazing team. Like, they had players that were unbelievable, and they were our best 2 players. That they rose, their game rose to a level that again, you probably asked the both of them, that they've never played at that level again. It was simply amazing, really, and it was fun to be part of. It was only a 2 out of 3 series, but it seemed like it was a 4 out of 7 because every shift was so important. And again, those guys, when the game was on the line, they made the difference at the highest level ever. And it was so much. It's a highlight of my hockey career, really, to be part of that.
I know it's unfair, really, to make comparisons, but you have said that Gretzky was the best you ever played with. Even having both of those guys on the same team, pushing one another like they did, you still give the nod to 99.
Yes. Well, I got to play with him in junior when he was 16, and 100, I believe it was 182 points or whatever it was. Like, that will never probably ever happen again in the Ontario Hockey League, to see that. And we were a decent team, but we certainly weren't a superstar team. We had a good team. We ended up going through the playoffs and lost to Bobby Smith in Ottawa, but he made some pretty average players look pretty good.
We touch on those 2 Canada Cups, and I know there was more internationally, including the World Juniors that you mentioned when Mr. Bumbacco helped you get a suit when you went over with the Finn Cups. You had a couple of chances at the juniors when you were playing, and several more as a coach where you managed to win gold. Is there a comparison, Craig, between going as a player and donning that jersey, going back as a coach and leading the team to victory?
Well, there was a big difference. Back in the 80s, I don't think the international competition was as important to Canada. Again, we went over there and played with the Finn Cups. Again, the team did very well. They lost. I think they were a bronze medal. The next year in Montreal, there was the first time they put a team together from all across Canada. And we end up, again, I think we got a bronze medal. We lost to Sweden in the semifinals. But again, at that point, it wasn't that important. And when I got a chance to be part of the coaching staff with Team Canada in the 2000s, it's a huge event now for Canada. And I was fortunate enough to be assistant coach with Brent Sutter. We won a gold in Vancouver, and then I was head coach in Sweden and the Czech Republic, and we won. So I was blessed. I've won 3 gold medals with the World Junior team, and it was just an awesome experience to be part of that. As a player, again, it wasn't that important to the country. But now you watch at Christmas time, it's huge, and to be part of that was amazing. Again, was very fortunate. We had some great players, and the kids were unbelievable. We had some success, and again, it was other than the Canada Cup, it's probably the second biggest highlight of my career, being coach of Canada's World Junior Tournament.
You know, you talk about the event that it's become and how much is really at stake and how much Canada invests in it, even just emotionally. And I wonder, as a coach, 2 pieces to it, really: how you bring all of that talent together and try to mold it into a team in a short period of time, and how you manage emotions, which has got to be one of the biggest parts of the job. You know, you've got the talent.
Yeah, the first part of your question was, we as a coach, you trust Hockey Canada staff to give you the info on the kids, because we cut probably a lot of kids that were higher scorers or maybe deemed as better players, and we wanted kids that would do that, would play a role, that would be able to accept a lesser role on this team than they would on their own team. So again, we trusted the Hockey Canada staff to give us input. And so we made the right selections the 3 years that I was there that would allow us to do that. And the emotional part is hard because the kids are so ramped up, and you have to make sure it's all directed in the right way. And the biggest, I remember the biggest challenge we had was my last year there, and we were playing in Sweden in the Czech Republic, and we played a heck of a game. We're up 2-0 for most of the game. Sweden scored a couple goals in the third period, and they scored with like a minute left to tie. And then the kids were devastated. Like and again, we're talking about kids like not kids now, but Brad Marchand, Claude Giroux. And so we go back to the room. We had to play overtime, and it was that was the emotions at that point were completely out of control, really, because they thought they had screwed up the gold medal, and we really had to get them back to thinking that, you know what, we can still win this thing. We just have to score a goal in overtime, and we end up going back out, and 2 of our grinder players, Matt Halschuk, ended up scoring the Kitchener Ranger, ended up scoring the winning goal in overtime. And it was again, the emotions were, I remember talking to kids on the ice after, and guys like Claude Giroux were in tears. It was just they thought they had let the country down by letting Sweden tie in the last minute, but again, they end up coming through when it counted in overtime.
Yeah, that's remarkable stuff. And, you know, that memory will be with you forever,
Oh,
without question.
oh, for sure. Those kids that we had on those 3 years that I was there, they were amazing. They were cared about the team first. They're all great, really good hockey players. Some of them have turned into Hall of Famers, and but it's just a great experience. And it's again, my wife went across into Europe with us, and again, I remember after, I don't know if the year before, when Jonathan Toews was in the shootout with the U.S. and we kept putting him out there, and for three in a row he scored. And I remember my wife coming after the end of the game. She was in tears. She said, "Don't ever do that again." And I was like, "Well, I would wish we didn't have to, but the kids, they're so much fun at that tournament. It's amazing."
How did you know, or what led to your decision when you left junior to jump into the WHA?
Uh, it was hard. It was I had played 3 years at junior, and I remember after our season ended, we played Ottawa in a really great series, an 8-game series, and we ended up losing. And my agent was Bill Waters, and my dad flew up to the Sioux, and they said they have an offer, to play next year in the WHA, uh, and again, I'm still young, and so you're listening to people telling you that it's going to be for your development. It's going to help you prepare to play in the NHL, and it was like, I hate leaving the Sioux, but at that point, I think it was the best thing for myself and the other guys that came with me. As the baby bulls, I think it really prepared us to play in the NHL. We got a year of playing professional hockey, living on our own, not with a billet family or your own family. And it gave us a chance to play against men. And so again, once we got to the National Hockey League the year after, I think we were much more prepared to play in the NHL.
Do you remember a game that first year, Craig, when you were a baby bull against Hartford when the power went out in the arena?
Oh yeah, I do. There's a few stories I have from that year, but that was weird. I can't remember if it was first, second period, but all of a sudden we were playing, and all of a sudden the whole building went black, like you couldn't see a thing, and it was like you did everything you could to get back to the bench because you kind of knew the direction maybe it was, and you got back to the bench, and then it was kind of chaos a little bit, and then we ended up getting back to the dressing room, but there was no lights anywhere, and eventually somebody found flashlights and all that stuff, and but it was wild. Like in the middle of a hockey game, it just goes completely black, and they end up canceling the game, and I think we came back at some point and played it, but it was pretty bizarre.
What are some of those other stories you remember from that year?
Oh, well, I remember we flew. We were supposed to play in Quebec on a Wednesday, so we flew up there on Tuesday, and so we're in Quebec, and then we flew up early enough to go for dinner, and then we're in our rooms, and all of a sudden the phone rings and said, "Well, we're not playing tomorrow because the league forgot to tell us that they changed the game till Thursday." So it was like, okay, whatever. But it was actually a pretty good league. It was a pretty good league. There was only 6 teams, and we were all Birmingham. We had a bunch of young players, and playing against guys like Gordie Howe and Bobby Hull. It was a pretty good league, actually.
It occurs to me as you talk about flying, and obviously you would from Birmingham to Quebec, but what a difference that must have been from a year prior when you're still in junior with the Sioux Greyhounds and you're taking the longest bus trips that anybody in junior has to take.
No, we flew.
Did you? Even
We
back then?
Well, we had a they had a DC-3, one of those planes that kind of sat on the runway pointing like this. And again, we had some pretty interesting flights. And I think that's Wayne hated flying when he got to the NHL. And I swear to God, it was because of flying on this DC-3 in the Sioux. Like, we flew the night the Edmund Fitzgerald went down in Sault Ste. Marie, just outside it. We were flying back from Toronto. So we got to Sudbury, and the pilot gets on and he says, we have to make an emergency landing in Sudbury. We cannot fly any farther. And meanwhile, we were just bouncing all over the place. So we spent the night in Sudbury. So the next day, and again, the weather was just horrible. And we're flying from Sudbury to the Sioux, which normally would take us 45 to 50 minutes. It took us almost 2 hours because we're headed right into this storm. And Muzz McPherson, he started singing, he got the microphone, he started singing, bringing in the sheep, bringing in the sheep. And we're grabbing the arm rests, and it was crazy. Anyway, so we had some trips with that plane that was pretty crazy. And the kids now, they all bus, and I probably would say right now, you're probably better off busing.
I was going to say, it sounds like you might have preferred a bus at that point, eh?
Well, we used to fly to like London, and we'd get a school bus, take us to the rink. And then after the game, the school bus take us back to the airport. We'd fly to Kitchener. It'd take us longer to get on the plane, off the plane, get on the school bus, and go to the hotel. And so it was pretty wild. It was interesting. They sold everybody on it. It was the greatest place. We're gonna fly, but it was this little DC-3 that sat probably like 30 people and stuffed all our equipment in the back.
I gotta say, you took my breath away just a little bit when you talked about being up in the air the night the Edmund Fitzgerald went down, because of course anybody who knows anything about Canadian music knows the famous song, which must have even more meaning to a guy like you, all things considered.
Oh yeah, I remember my first year we were flying to Oshawa on the day of the game of the playoffs, first game of the playoffs, and so we take off, and the one engine is all of a sudden it's on fire. So we had to turn back to the Sioux, and we took a commercial flight, like left at 3:00 in the afternoon, and then got to Oshawa at like whatever 5:30, played the game, and this was the first game of the playoffs. So there was lots of good flights too. I remember we played in Kenora. We went to play our tier 2 team in Kenora. We went up to play an exhibition game, and it was great. It was lots of fun, but it was like minus 35 degrees. So we get back on the plane, and they had sandwiches and pop for us. Everything was froze solid. Sitting on the plane. So anyways, I had 3 years. It was awesome. You know, what I want my son or grandson to do the same thing in that plane like that? Probably not, but they have a great organization there in the Sioux with the buses and everything. They do a great job of treating these kids great, but we've all got some stories to tell.
That's wild. You know, we talked about you being a third overall into the Ontario Hockey League to the Sioux. Gaston Gingras, I think, went first to Kitchener in that draft. And then it was another defenseman. Did Ramage go first, or was he just the first D your NHL draft?
Yes, Rob was, and we lived together in Birmingham. Rob and I lived together. And so he was the first pick. I'm trying to think how that draft went, but yeah, I ended up being the sixth.
There were some big names in that draft, and you went ahead of Ray Bourque, by the way.
I know, and I just played golf with him the other day, and he reminded me of that too. So,
did you know that Minnesota was going to take you?
No, I had no clue really. Up to the draft again. I think actually St. Louis had the second pick, and they picked Perry Turnbull, and that was all along, Bill Waters has said probably St. Louis. So in the morning of the draft, I think LA had the 3rd pick, and I can't remember who they picked. He said, okay, he might end up in LA. And I said, okay. So I'm just waiting at the phone, and finally I got a call, and it was because the draft, it was actually an August draft. They pushed it back because of the merger with the WHA. And so no players were at the draft. It was nothing like they do now. So we were all just sitting by the phone waiting to see who drafted you. And I got the call, and the agent, and then Lou Nanny, who was from the Sioux, called and said, you're part of the North Stars. So I was pretty excited.
Man, the Sioux connections just keep coming up in your career here, Craig.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't long after that you start with the Minnesota North Stars in the National Hockey League that you're in a Stanley Cup final against, of all teams, the New York Islanders during their dynasty. What do you remember of that experience?
Well, obviously not the way we wanted to go, but they were so good, and I have no problem saying that they were a better team. They were experienced. They had veteran players, Hall of Famers, and we, to get there, we had to go through some real good teams and tough teams to get there, and but once we got there, I think they beat us in 5 games, and they were just too strong. They won 4 cups in a row, and I believe we were the second of their cups, and they had Bossy, Trache, Gillies, Potvin, all Hall of Fame players, but they had great role players that were tough and played the right way. And so again, it was a great experience getting there. And we were a young team. We thought, well, we didn't win this year, we probably are going to get back in the next year or two to have another shot. But it's a tough league, and we never got back to that point again.
Were there any similarities? I mean, obviously the market is much bigger, but you're talking in Minnesota, I'm thinking comparisons to Sault Ste. Marie when you're in a northern climate and the city is just mad for hockey.
Oh, I loved that. Was the best thing for me. It was like it was like going. It was like I never left Canada. Really, the hockey was the weather, the hockey, the people. It was a great place. We were there 11 years, and we loved every minute of it. It is a big town, big city. Minneapolis, St. Paul is a big area, but again, we felt that we were just going to a bigger Sault Ste. Marie.
You were such a young man, Craig, when you had to hang him up due to injury, obviously. But how tough was that for a guy that plays, you're almost 600 games into a pro career. Hockey's basically all you've known. How tough was it to hang him up?
It was hard, really hard. But I could not continue to play at a level that would allow me to play in the NHL. I've had 2 hip replacements. I'm going to have my knee replaced this summer, and what was happening though is I was exposing myself to more injuries because I end up getting hit more, and I just was not very mobile on the ice because of basically my one hip and my one knee at that point. And it was tough, and I loved the game and I wanted to be part of the game, but I couldn't play at the NHL level because of the injuries that I had.
Did you know while you were playing that coaching was something that you might pursue, or how did that come about?
Not for the first part of my career. Certainly wasn't a thought. At the end, the last couple of years, because I knew, again, because of the injuries, that I was probably going to have to retire earlier than what I wanted. So I started to think about it, and I always enjoyed the preparation part as a player. Talk what the other team weaknesses, strengths, and I always enjoyed that part of it. So my last couple of years, I started probably paying a little bit more attention to that, and again, so when I retired in the middle of the year, Pierre Pagé was the coach of Minnesota at that point. He asked if I wanted to stay on and just be a kind of advisor in the press box, maybe come on the ice and practice and give my opinion, help the D and stuff like that. So I did it, and I liked it. I loved it. And so after that year, Paul Holmgren, who played in Minnesota his last couple of years, ended up being the head coach in Philly, and we became pretty close in Minnesota. So he asked if I would be interested in moving to Philly and be part of his staff. So that's kind of how it all started.
I'm going to come right back to that, because from Philly, it took an interesting turn in your coaching career, kind of a full circle moment, I would think. But I wondered about the letter on your sweater too, Craig, and how much of that might have made coaches look at you and think there might be something here. But 2 years in the Sioux, 7 years in Minnesota. If it wasn't for Darian Hatcher, you'd be the longest serving captain in Minnesota history. But what does it mean to have that C on your sweater?
You know what? It's an honor, really. It's and I've coached lots of teams too where we've made captains, and I try to tell them my experience a little bit is that we're not making you captain to try to, so you have to do anything different. Just be yourself. You may have to speak up more at times, but just go about your business as you are. That's why you've made your captain. But it is an honor to be a captain. They choose you because you choose a captain because of the values and the principles that you have, and your impact on the game. You know, how you play the game the right way, and so it is an honor. Any person out there, any player that's a captain at junior level or NHL or at any level, really, it is an honor because they're picking you because of who you are. They don't want you to try to be something other than who you are.
So that sort of full circle moment I alluded to a second ago takes you back to Guelph from Philadelphia. You become a head coach in the Ontario Hockey League with the Guelph Storm. You talked earlier when Angela Bombaco came to see you for the first time, you were with the Biltmore Hatters, Mad Hatters there in Guelph. But back into the Ontario Hockey League as a head coach and all the way to an OHL championship. What was it like getting back behind a bench in the O?
Well, it was amazing because I worked for some unbelievable people in Guelph. And to this day, probably the best person that I worked for was Mike Kelly. And all my career as a player or as a coach and coach in the NHL, Mike Kelly is probably the best person that I've worked for. And the ownership group there in Guelph was unbelievable. Jim Rooney was our president. And again, it was a pretty unique situation. I went there and it turned out to be probably the best decision I've ever made in hockey in going to Guelph.
Mike Kelly was just inducted into the Guelph Sports Hall of Fame.
Oh, and well deserved.
Yeah.
It's obviously a great honor for a great man, and pretty proud of him.
If that was a bit of a full circle moment, though, come on, going to coach in Sault Ste. Marie as the head coach of the Greyhounds. I don't know if it could have gotten any better than that for you, Craig.
Well, well, for sure. It was when I left, I got fired in Anaheim, and actually a friend of mine from the Sioux, we together, we tried to buy the Greyhounds and put a bid in. We got outbid by another group, and the other group actually asked me to come and coach and be the GM. And it was kind of it was a bit of a controversial thing in the Sioux, who was going to get the team, who was going to buy the team. So there was some little bit of hard feelings, but you know what? It was the Greyhounds. They were my team. They're what helped me as a young boy become a man. So I was so pumped to go back to the Sioux and coach in the Sioux. It was again, it was like a surreal. It was a dream. My wife, we were so excited to go back and live in the Sioux. It didn't last the whole long the first time. I know I move around a little bit, so but the first time it was pretty neat, and so was the second time to go back to the Sioux.
What was your coaching philosophy or style? How did you motivate guys?
Well, I think for me, I based how our team was going to be played on some certain principles. Work ethic was going to be a premium. Discipline was going to be a premium. Uh, Team first attitude was going to be a premium. So those, starting with some principles like that, we were going to, whether we had the best players or average players, we were going to try to be the best team and get the most out of our kids. And especially, and I'm talking again, probably more junior hockey at this point, but we wanted our kids to play for each other. We wanted them to be disciplined on and off the ice. We were probably maybe a little more strict off the ice than maybe most teams in the league, but we felt that was very important. If parents are going to send us their 17, 16-year-old kids, we were going to make sure that they were in school. We were going to make sure that they weren't out at night. And some of the kids didn't like it at times, but we certainly wanted to run the program the way I would want if I was a parent sending my kid there. And were we demanding? Yes, I was very demanding on this is what we're going to do on the ice. There was no gray area as far as how hard we had to play, how hard we had to compete. The team play was going to be, this is how you do it. And but I believe that's what kids need. They needed discipline, and they needed to, and again, we thought it was best for the kids, plus their parents and the community, that these kids were part of this program.
One of those other stops in your coaching career at the pro level was with Chicago, where you coached a guy by the name of Chris Chelios. I've heard you say before, if Gretzky was the best you ever played with, Chelios was the best you ever coached.
Oh, no question. And I coached some other pretty good players, Paul Kariya, Delaney, but Chris was the ultimate warrior, competitor, just just an elite player. Like I don't know how many Norris trophies. He won one Norris trophy when he was playing for me, but and he was a hard guy. He wasn't he wasn't a warm and cuddly guy where you talk to him all the time. But he wanted to win more than any player that I've ever been around, really, as a coach or a player.
You kind of joke that the first time in the Sioux it didn't go so well. You bounced around a bit, which is the life of a coach, isn't it, Craig? We still say to this day, coaches are hired to be fired. That must take a toll on you as a person, and certainly on family life.
It does, but you know what? It's like you move on pretty quick when you have to believe in yourself if you're going to be a young coach that wants to move on. You have to keep your ears open. You have to learn. You have to listen. You have to see things, and you have to take criticism. And unfortunately, your family has to learn to deal with that too, which is not easy. Whether you have kids or your wife, and it's probably easier for you as the coach than it is for your family.
How do those media guys up in the Sioux treat you, eh? Rucci and Rusan,
Oh,
and I could list them all off here.
well, they're awesome people, actually. Bill Montague
Billy, yeah, yeah.
and Peter Ricci. They're, you know what, they did a great job when they covered the Sioux. Neither one of them are now working in the media, but they cared. They cared about their job first, but they also cared about hockey and they cared about the Greyhounds because they thought it was important for them to do their job the right way. And you know, there was there days I wanted to strangle Bill or tell Peter to take a hike. Yeah, and Randy Russin is the same thing. Those three guys were unbelievable. And as a young coach, uh, to deal with people that care that much in the media, it makes you a better coach. You know, and I've always said that it's like, and I'm not being critical, but if you're coaching in Mississauga, like you don't really get to learn that part of the business. And in the Sioux and probably Kitchener as well, because they're in London and the markets that where people care about the team, you have to learn how to deal with the media if you're a young coach. And I think it's part of the learning experience for young coaches to get better and move on to the next level.
As a player or as a coach, Craig, was there an OHL city that you just dreaded visiting?
Not dreaded. There was always places at times where people were, and Windsor had some, when their old building there had some hardcore hardcore people. And actually and in Kitchener was not, there was two or three got men that sat behind the bench in Kitchener that were really hard on the visiting team. But for the most part, it was kind of fun. You know, like the junior hockey is a great. It's a great entertainment, and now there's some really nice buildings. And when again, Windsor was not a great building to go into.
Definitely, that old barn was a barn.
Yeah. So, anyways, but no, it was always a challenge, you know, and it was always a challenge to go on the road with 17, 18-year-old kids because, you know, some of them it was all new to them. You know, you go into London now, the London rink, it's 9,000. You put a 16-year-old on the rink in the game in London, it's like, wow. And Kitchener's the same thing because they, you know, great fan support stuff that they're coming from playing midget hockey. All of a sudden, there are 9,000 people, and they love it, but it's still they're like their eyes get big as saucers. So, but you know, not really. I don't think there's a building that you're like, this is terrible. Other than maybe when I think the old Windsor rink was that was a tough crowd there.
Yeah, they could give you a hard time, no question. It usually comes up when we go down that road. Do you miss the old gardens in the Sioux?
I do, but I think the building we have now, the Sioux, is unbelievable.
It's perfect, isn't it?
It's unbelievable, perfect for the city. And the old gardens. Again, I remember playing there, and it's a special place, but its time was done. Really, it was time to move on from the cricket seats and. But no, it was a fun place. I remember when I was 16, I went up there, and coming from Stratford, we had a nice little rink in Stratford, but still the Memorial Gardens in the Sioux, I still thought that this was the greatest building. And then I remember going back to coach there, and I'm going, oh boy, we need a new building.
How your perspective changes, eh?
And this, you know what, you know, God bless the city and the ownership there. They did a great job in getting that building through, and it's been a huge help to keep the franchise there.
Good reminder for me on Stratford and the Allman Arena. I know it could probably use a whole lot of upgrades, but there's a charm to an arena like that for sure.
Oh yeah, I haven't been there for a few years, but if you next time if you're ever there, watch when you walk in the front door. There's a little star there with my name on it in the front
I'm going to
door.
look for it now.
Yeah, but no, I remember that as a kid too, because it was it was so much fun. Because again, we used to play. If you played Kitchener, you from novice, pee wee, bantam, it would be on a Tuesday night. Every team would play Kitchener from starting at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and then you'd go to Kitchener maybe the week after, or Waterloo. So it was kind of, again, it was a community night where you were playing Kitchener on a Tuesday night, and people would go starting at 6 o'clock to watch the little guys and all the way up to the midget team. So it was a pretty neat place.
We're talking about a career in hockey, Craig, for you that spans more than 40 years at this point. Not to date you or anything, but how do you feel about where our game is at today?
Well, I think the game is 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 so much better in so many ways, but there are some areas that you probably look at and say, okay, I wish maybe this was a little different. But I think in general, the game is so much better, it's so much faster. There's so much more skill at all levels. My grandkids play in the Sioux in AAA, and they're amazing little players. And there's other kids they play with their, again, we're in Northern Ontario, that are really good players that have developed. They start development so much younger than when we were. So the speed and the skill, the one thing I always think is that players maybe don't think the game, not all players think the game as well as maybe older players had to think the game, because it's so structured, and they just go, and sometimes maybe it's too fast. They play too fast, and rather than reading the situations in the game. But I think the game is so fun to watch now, and I watch games every night just for fun. And there's some bad games like there was 20 years ago, but for the most part, the games, they every game offers some skill and some special plays, and you can see the strategy. And again, to me, it's the greatest game, and it's going to keep getting better, because players, there's so many good players that are there, and there's every team is going to keep adding good players. And when we played, there's probably there was top end of your team was always pretty good, but now you're looking at third, fourth lines. These guys add so much to the game skill wise that just keeps the pace of the game going for 60 minutes, where before it would be the top lines would go, and then the game would start to drop off when the third, fourth lines would come. But now it's just a constant. There's so many good players in junior. I go watch junior games. It's like the junior games used to drop off too when your third and fourth lines would come out, because they were all so young. But now the young players are so skilled, that keeps the pace of the game going all night long.
Yeah, it's I love where the game is at too. There are certain things that I miss, but I heard you mention the grandkids a few times in this conversation. That must be the best part of where you're at in life right now, watching them play.
Oh yeah, oh for sure. They're 13 and 11, and I get to be behind the bench with the 13-year-old during the season this year. Where I go back to be part of tournaments with them, and they love it. And that's all. The only thing I care about is if they love the game, keep playing. If they don't want to play, they don't like it, go do something else. But they just love the game, both of them, and it's so much fun watching them.
Are they in awe of Grandpa, that star at the
Oh,
Almond? You're on the Wall of Fame at the Gardens in the Sioux. Come on.
no, they don't say much about that. They kind of like, oh, grandpa. It's like, I tell them something. It's like, yeah, I know. They're like, they're kids, and that we don't push much on them. We just all again. Their dad is played the OHL for 5 years in Windsor, Craig Kennedy, and so he's coached both of them, and so he does a great job with them, and so I don't say a lot to them actually. I just buy them sticks. That's my job.
Look at that. From NHLer and Stanley Cup finalist to stick boy. That's how it's gone, eh?
Wow, the sticks are so expensive. It's
No
crazy.
kidding.
So the 13-year-old now is strong enough. He breaks them. And it's like, okay, Colin, this is the last one for this month.
You might have to start calling in favors, Craig.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Well, listen, this has been a lot of fun to get the chance to sit down and talk, especially junior hockey with you and your deep connections to it. And Sault Ste. Marie, which I love, not quite as much as you yet, but boy, oh boy, I have really fallen in love with that city. I love our trips up there every year. So thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me. And again, it's junior hockey is a great thing. And any kid in the Southern Ontario that wants to go to the Soo, don't worry, it's a great place.